What's up, my fellow fiends? It's Nim here, back with a new model. I spent my time recovering from my tooth problems to update my model a bit, so go ahead and tell me what you guys think about this new version. I'm really digging it, though. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into those horror stories for today. Circle around, folks. Let me tell you a tale of when people could sit around a table and throw physical dice. Our group's been rolling for roughly 8 years, with me playing D&D for the last 15 years, with us playing D&D 4th edition for most of the time. We usually juggle the DM role around about once every 1 to 3 years. So, the story begins when I take the DM torch while attending university. The mix of studies, parenthood, and general workload ends up leaving me unable to DM satisfying games. I can feel I don't have the actual energy to DM, and I can feel the general outcome of my games being quite subpar. I know the runner-up for the DM role is out of energy as well, so I propose to the group to try and add a new person to our merry group. Through social media, I pick up some noble soul willing to fill the role for us. The recruitment process kind of shows a few initial red flags. The guy lives a good bit away and has no suitable places to host games near his home. We end up working up some deal to help make the whole bus ride worthwhile, maybe work up some compensation with the rest of the group. Most of the games are held at my place, so I propose to him to have the first game here. He agrees, gives us very sparse details to start building our characters. Basically lets me know we'll roll stats in person, we'll be X level, playing in 3.5, and that he's very open to exotic material. We have no detail as far as the setting goes, only that it's homebrew and not attached to any particular setting. I relay the info to the group, which in turn kicks the hype in overdrive. Going from 4th edition to 3.5, people were going borderline crazy. I end up opening some more obscure books in my collection, line up what the group might miss. No frontline in the group, I open up the Book of Nine Sword. Spot the Crusader. Race, I pull up a race of mind-linked twins, I forget the name of it, which ends up playing two identical characters with a common pool of resources. The lore behind the race makes a big deal behind the idea that these twins are in unison in most things, even to the point where if one of them dies, the other one kind of rots away in depression. The DM agrees to let me play them, after having read up on the race from his side, but lets me know that he might chime in once in a while to try and reflect the idea of two minds with two different points of views, which in retrospect isn't how the race works. I agree, thinking this would be at most equivalent of a familiar's nagging attitude towards its spellcaster, like one of the twins having a once-in-a-while quirk with me playing the other one. So, come the day of the game, I have a special surprise in store for the group. One of our players is in the military. We'll call him Mr. Man. So we're used to him not being around for some periods of time. Most of the group isn't even aware he's in town for a couple months, so I invite him to join the game with the DM's agreement. He shows up early, we do a bit of catching up, the rest of the group shows up, and everyone's just so trucking hyped for this. We're happy to see our friend back with us, we're happy to be playing a new edition, for most of the group it was, and we're adding a new friend, the DM, to the lot. So we begin building the characters. The DM is very generous with the stats. Most of our characters' weakest rolls end up being around 14s. The table's filled up, roughly 5 to 6 players, and everyone's buzzy, chipping away at everything. At some point it hits me that the DM has been, so far, very absent in the conversation of who's playing what. So I pointed out, saying we all should make sure whatever we build gets an okay from him. First player says he's playing a cloistered cleric, basically a well-read divine caster. DM gives it the go. Another one wants to play a rogue. DM gives it a go. I hint that I'm playing a funky character, and the other players want to know more. I explain the mechanics. Everyone's wowed, but the DM starts to chime in, saying, "You might lose control of one of your twins at some point." What's that? Yeah, if a fight breaks out, one of them might just disagree and not fight. But I'm the group's front line. The whole idea is to have a twin team working together to make sure everyone is safe. I had gathered that most of the players would play more skill-focused characters. If one of them stops fighting, this is no good. Well, we agreed on it, and you're gonna have to deal with it. Well, this isn't fun. You're telling me that at any point you might take control of half my character and decide on what it does? Yup, twins tend to disagree with each other. You're gonna have to deal with the fact that one of them might just be too depressed to fight. Visibly angered from what the others told me, I tried to keep my calm as best I could. I told him why not simply just play the character himself and I'd better just play something else. To which he retorts, well, in these situations, I usually invite the player to leave. To me. In my home. I decide to switch characters, going for a battle sorcerer, to which he immediately lines up a few good conditions. Arcane spellcasters are tied down in his setting, spell component pouches are banned, public castings are highly frowned upon, etc. At that point, I just go and prepare the day's meal to vent my steam out. While I get to work, the DM gets to Mr. Man's character. He decides to play a Paladin, which in turn seems to fill the DM with glee. Choice of race, Mr. Man is very RP-oriented in general, and sees the Hellbred as a flavor-filled choice for a Paladin. That race is basically a soul who's sent back from hell for one last chance at redemption. It looks like its skin is molten magma, but it doesn't emit out ordinary heat, and it has a hellish look to it. The group is wowed again. Everyone loves the idea and the flavor of it. The DM, not so much. Says anything remotely tied to hell gets frowned upon in general. He gives Mr. Man one last chance to switch it up, but he's adamant, thinking the stigmatization would be a nice challenge. The choice is sealed, everyone's characters are complete, the meal has been eaten, we had nice chats about everything and anything. To us, D&D is basically an excuse to socialize, and the DM has been well informed of it, so this is usual before we get down to it. Then the DM starts to lay some ground rules before the game begins. He tolerates no out-of-character discussion at the table, imposing heavy XP penalties at the end of the game for anything not related to the game. As such, cell phones are not tolerated from him, and any time he has to snap us back to the game will be heavily reprimanded. He tells us that we won't like him as a DM, that he won't be our friend anymore. He even mentions the fact that he usually brings props to the game, capes, trinkets, and the moment he puts on his attire, we should all start treating him like a DM. The room goes from happy social to dead silence right there. Uneasy stares are exchanged. Some comments are thrown to check to see if this is real. The DM reiterates he's serious. Now, my group isn't the most disorderly I've ever been with. I've seen some players literally spin their game high as kites or their faces glued to their cell phones. But to us, demanding this level of discipline in a social event sounded off. We all kind of agreed to it, saying we'll figure things out as things go, and seeing as how the day was slowly coming to an end, we wanted to at least dip our toes in the setting before we call it a day. Game starts. DM wants to go over each character individually to explain when and where we are standing in his setting. The priest gets a free pass, they're common. The rogue gets it easy enough, he's been around, he's a talented fellow. My sorcerer gets his component pouch sealed away, he's in some sort of magical institution where casters are very closely observed. Joke's on him, I took askew materials. There's a few extra players around, but not worth mentioning for the closure of this story. Then it comes to Mr. Man's Paladin. Since he's a demonish guy, he has to wear full plate. All day. Or else he gets directly hit by the wrath of the gods. Every gap in the armor must be filled to make sure his true nature is hidden. Oh, and his voice sounds hellish too, so he can't speak. He gets a free silent spell meta magic to anything he casts, though. The DM has that look of, I'm being generous here, while we all stare mouths agape. Mr. Man, a very roleplay guy with an 18-ish charisma score, would have to spend the whole campaign not saying a single word. The DM gets the stage for the rest of the evening. No one says a thing. His setting was decent. He describes it to us for roughly an hour. We call it quits. He gets a lift from one of the players back home. Apparently it was a very silent ride. We decide for the next 8 hours that he's not a good fit. I let him know and we call it quits. Mr. Man ends up DMing for us a 3.5 campaign for a few months. Happiness and crazy stunts ensue. We hold that event as a warning sign. Never accept DMs who wear capes at their games. So, firstly, as a tiefling myself, I have to say, go screw yourself. I'll be a demon wherever I want. Secondly, homebrew campaigns can be an amazing thing. You can do whatever you want with your world. But you need to tell the players before they start making their characters for that world. And no, just, are you sure? Isn't a good enough warning. If you have so many restrictions on that kind of character, you need to absolutely make it very clear what the consequences of their choice are going to be. As soon as he said he was going to be a Hellbrid, that DM needed to speak up and say, okay, you're not even going to be able to talk if you play this character. The DM needs to make that super clear from the beginning. You can't just hint and say, oh, there might be some bad choices if you decide to do this. No, you need to explain to players why their choice is bad. Why even say, okay, if you're basically going to make that character unplayable? And I completely understand why the OP was so ticked off whenever the DM decided, oh, no, half your character, just unplayable now. Who does that? Who does that? What sort of DM sits down and goes, no, I'm going to take away half your character? Apparently this DM. I can 100% see why OP was so annoyed with the DM by saying, oh yeah, I'm basically going to take away half your character. You thought you were going to be a frontline fighter? You thought you were going to be beneficial to your party? I don't think so. Instead, you're going to be saddled with a whiny NPC who doesn't want to do anything that is supposed to be under your control, but is actually under mine. The last issue with this DM is much more of a simple clash of play styles than anything else, although I have never heard of a DM being that strict. To say, if you have literally any out-of-character discussion at the table, you will get XP penalties. That is insane, my dude. Now, obviously, you can't take D&D seriously. Some people do D&D as their job. But for this group, it's a fun social excuse. It's like that in our group. We're not the most distracted players, but we do just use D&D kind of as an excuse to get together socially. We use it to strengthen our friendships and to have something to do. It's not this major end-all be-all, basically e-sport like this guy's trying to play it as. And it would be amazing to have a DM who brought props and things, if his attitude was good. But clearly this guy's attitude does not match up with these players. Again, he might be right for some people, if he works on prepping his party more on the specifics of why their choices may not mesh so well with the world. But to go out there and say, are you sure that's a bad choice? I wouldn't make that choice if I were you. And not actually tell them why they wouldn't make that choice is just mean-spirited to be mean-spirited. I cannot understand why you would do that. Anyway, guys, that's been this week's horror story. It was a bit of a long one, so I hope you enjoyed. Tell me in the comments below what you think of this guy. You know, what are your DMs like? If you are a DM, how do you treat out-of-character talk at the table? I know our DM doesn't mind it so much, but again, we use D&D as more of a social gathering excuse than a major serious game. So I hope you all enjoyed the story this week. I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye!